Pot continuar. The smell of pine needles always brings it back, even now, when I'm sitting in this padded chair with a blanket over my knees. It's funny how the mind works at 92. I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I can remember the exact shade of gray the sky was over the Ardennes in the winter of '44. It wasn't just a color, it was a weight. It pressed down on you, cold and indifferent, making you feel like the world had forgotten you existed. We were shivering in holes we'd scraped out of the frozen earth, listening to the trees crack like pistol shots in the frost. That's when I first heard the story that changed how I looked at the woods and how I looked at the men we were fighting. We had this guy with us, a replacement who'd come up through the lines after a stint in a hospital. He'd been attached to a unit that processed displaced persons and some of the foreign volunteers the Germans had swept up. He told us about a man he'd met, a Finnish officer who had managed to get out before the Russians closed the net. This officer didn't want to talk about the Germans or the Americans. He wanted to talk about a farmer, a man who didn't look like a soldier, didn't act like a hero, but who had become a ghost in the snow. They called him the White Death. I remember sitting there, blowing on my hands to keep the feeling in my fingers, listening to this story of a man who didn't use a scope because the glint of the sun on glass would give him away. He used iron sights. He'd put snow in his mouth so his breath wouldn't steam in the air and betray his position. Think about that for a second. Think about the discipline it takes to sit in sub-zero temperatures, heart rate slowed to a crawl, with a mouthful of freezing slush just to stay invisible. We were kids from Ohio, from New York, from the farms of Iowa. We thought we knew what being tough was. But hearing about this man, this farmer who eliminated over 500 men in the span of a few months, it made the woods feel different. Every shadow looked like a pair of eyes. Every gust of wind sounded like a footfall. We realized then that the most dangerous man on the battlefield isn't the one with the biggest tank or the loudest gun. It's the one you never see, the one who belongs to the land while you're just passing through it. I spent a lot of nights after that wondering if there was someone like that watching us from the tree line, someone who knew the name of every tree and the depth of every drift, while we were just shivering strangers waiting for the sun to come up. It's a heavy thing to carry, the knowledge that you're being hunted by something you can't define. In the infantry, you get used to the noise. You get used to the mortar rounds whistling in and the crunch of the 88s. You can deal with what you can hear. But the silence is what gets into your bones. That Finnish officer told our guy that the Russians eventually stopped fearing the bullets and started fearing the forest itself. They reached a point where they wouldn't even step off the road to relieve themselves. They huddled together for warmth, making themselves perfect targets because the alternative was stepping into the white void where the farmer was waiting. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about that farmer often, especially when the winter air hits my lungs. He wasn't a man of malice, from what I heard. He was just a man defending his home. There's a purity in that, even if the result is something as dark as 500 souls lost to the snow. When we moved deeper into Germany, the terrain changed, but that feeling of being watched never really left me. We'd be moving through these dense thickets in the Hurtgen forest, and the trees were so thick you couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of you. It was a sniper's paradise. I remember one afternoon, we were pinned down by a single shooter. We couldn't find him. He wasn't like the farmer in the stories. He didn't have the luxury of a frozen wasteland, but he had the ruins of a village and the dark boughs of the fir trees. He took out our medic first. That's a special kind of cruelty, taking the man who's supposed to save the rest of us. We laid there in the mud for 4 hours. 4 hours of not moving a muscle, listening to our friend moan until he didn't moan anymore. I kept thinking about the Finnish farmer. I kept thinking about how he would have handled it. He would have been the one in the tree or under the brush, perfectly still. He wouldn't have been scared. He would have been the fear itself. There's a psychological break that happens when you realize you're powerless against an unseen force. My squad leader, a guy named Miller from Pennsylvania, was one of the toughest men I ever knew. He'd walked through the fire at Normandy and never blinked. But that day in the woods, I saw his hands shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization that we were being picked apart by a ghost. He looked at me and whispered, "Henry, if I go, don't you dare come for me. You just stay down." That's the kind of choice the war forces on you. You have to decide between your humanity and your survival. The farmer in Finland, he'd made his choice long ago. He'd become a part of the landscape. To him, There was no difference between the wind and his rifle. To us, everything was an enemy. We eventually got a tank up the road to blast the tree line where we thought the shooter was, but when we finally moved up, we found nothing. No body, no brass, just a matted down patch of grass behind a stone wall. He'd vanished, just like the stories of the White Death. He'd done his job and faded away, leaving us with one less friend and a lifetime of nightmares. I wonder sometimes if that man in Finland ever regretted what he did. They say he lived to be an old man, well into his 90s, just like I am now. Did he see the faces of those 500 men when he closed his eyes at night? Or did he just see the snow? I think for a man like that, the war isn't something that happens to him. It's something he performs, like a harvest. You do what needs to be done to protect the farm, and then you go back to the farm. But for us, for the boys who were sent across an ocean to fight in someone else's woods, we couldn't just go back. We brought the woods home with us. I brought the silence of the Ardennes back to a small town in America, and I've been trying to fill it with noise ever since. But every now and then, the noise fades, and I'm back there, listening to the story of the farmer who never missed. It's a reminder that the world is much bigger and much more terrifying than the maps lead you to believe. There are people who belong to the earth in a way we never will. And when the earth decides to fight back, there's no place to hide. I remember another time, later in the spring, when the war was supposed to be winding down. We were in a small German town, and the locals were mostly women, children, and old men. We were searching houses, looking for any stragglers or SS who might be hiding out. I walked into this one cellar, and it was pitch black. I had my grease gun out, finger on the trigger, heart hammering against my ribs. I heard a breath. Just a tiny, sharp intake of air. I froze. I thought, this is it. This is the unseen enemy. I clicked my flashlight on, and there was an old man, probably the age I am now, sitting in a chair with a hunting rifle across his lap. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a farmer. He looked at me with eyes that had seen everything, and he didn't raise the gun. He just sat there. I realized in that moment that I was the invader. I was the one the Finnish stories were about. Only I was on the wrong side of the legend. I was the one who didn't belong. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I lowered my weapon and backed out of that cellar. I didn't tell anyone he was there. I figured he'd earned his silence. War has a way of stripping away the person you think you are and replacing it with the person you have to be. I spent 3 years being a soldier, but I've spent 70 years trying to be a human being again. It's not as easy as they make it look in the movies. You don't just put the uniform in a box and walk away. The things you saw, the choices you made, they stay in the room with you. They sit at the dinner table. They watch you while you sleep. I think about the Finnish officers who discovered what that one farmer had done. I wonder what their faces looked like when they saw the tally. Did they feel pride? Or did they feel a sort of holy terror that one of their own was capable of such efficient destruction? I think it was probably a bit of both. You want a man like that on your side, but you don't want to have to look him in the eye after the shooting stops. Because when you look at him, you're looking at the raw, unvarnished truth of what we are when the thin veneer of civilization is stripped away. We are hunters. We are prey. And the only thing that separates us is who sees who first. I remember my buddy Joe. He was from Brooklyn, talked a mile a minute, and could find a way to laugh at anything. We were moving through a village near the Rhine, and the sun was actually out for once. It felt like the world might be turning a corner. Joe was telling me about this girl he wanted to marry when he got home, describing the dress she'd wear and the church they'd use. He was so full of life, so full of the future. And then, in the middle of a sentence, he just stopped. There was no sound, no flash, just Joe falling forward like his strings had been cut. I grabbed him, pulled him behind a stone trough, but he was already gone. One shot, clean, professional. The unseen enemy again. I stayed there with Joe for an hour, watching his blood mix with the muddy water in the trough, and I felt this cold, hard knot form in my chest. That was the moment I stopped being a boy. That was the moment I understood the Finnish farmer. I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't want to be a soldier. I wanted to be the ghost. I wanted to be the one who didn't give the enemy a chance to say goodbye to their futures. It took me a long time to forgive myself for that feeling. For a long time I felt like a monster because I wanted to kill with that same cold efficiency. I wanted to disappear into the trees and strike without warning. But that's what the war does. It turns your survival instinct into a weapon. You start to admire the very thing that's trying to destroy you because it's the only thing that seems to make sense in the chaos. The Finnish farmer wasn't a murderer to his people. He was a savior. He was the wall between them and annihilation. When you're in the middle of it, you don't see the politics or the grand strategy. You just see the man in the sights. You see the threat to your friends, and you do whatever it takes to make that threat go away. I often wonder if the men he targeted ever had a chance to feel anything. Based on the stories, they probably didn't. They just ceased to be. One moment they were cold and tired and thinking about home, and the next, they were part of the landscape. There's a mercy in that, I suppose, compared to the way some of my friends went out. We were crossing the Rhine in March of '45. It was a massive operation, smoke and noise, and the feeling of the whole world moving in one direction. But even in the middle of that mechanical roar, I felt small. I felt like I was being watched. By then, the stories of the Finnish farmer had spread through the ranks, becoming a kind of folk legend. Every time we saw a white smudge on a hillside or a movement in a high window, someone would mutter, "Watch out, it's the White Death." It was a joke, a way to handle the fear, but the fear was real. We were entering the heart of the enemy's home, and we knew they had people who were just as desperate and just as skilled as that farmer had been. We were the ones on the road now, the ones huddled in the trucks, and the woods belonged to the men who had nowhere else to go. It's a terrifying thing to realize that you've become the target in someone else's story. I remember seeing a group of German prisoners being marched back toward our lines. They looked like ghosts themselves, hollow-eyed, gray-skinned, their uniforms rags. One of them caught my eye. He couldn't have been more than 16. He was shivering so hard his teeth were clicking. I reached into my pack and gave him a piece of chocolate I'd been saving. He took it, but he didn't look at me. He looked through me. I realized then that he wasn't my enemy anymore. He was just another victim of the silence. He'd probably spent the last 6 months waiting for a bullet he never saw coming. And now that he was safe, he didn't know how to be a person again. I felt a strange connection to him. We were both survivors of a game we never asked to play. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about that kid sometimes. I hope he made it back to his mother. I hope he found a way to live in the world without looking at the tree line every time he walked down the street. The war ended for me in a hospital in France. I'd caught a piece of shrapnel in my leg, not from a sniper ironically, but from a stray mortar round. While I was laying there listening to the other guys groan and talk, I had a lot of time to think. I thought about the Finnish farmer and the 542 men. I tried to imagine that many people in one place. It's a small town. It's a whole community wiped off the face of the earth by one man with a rifle. The scale of it is impossible to wrap your head around. But then I'd think about Joe, and I'd think about the kid in the cellar, and I'd realize that the numbers don't matter. It's the individual lives that carry the weight. One man's death is a universe ending. To the Finnish officers, it was a discovery of a tactical miracle. To the families of those men, it was a hole that would never be filled. I wondered which one I would be when I got home. Would I be the hero who did his part, or would I be a man who'd seen too much of the dark to ever really enjoy the light? When I finally got back to the States, the silence was the hardest part to get used to. People were so loud. They talked about things that didn't matter: the price of milk, the new cars, the neighbor's business. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them that the world was a fragile place, that there were men in the woods who could take it all away in a heartbeat. But I didn't. I kept it inside. I married a girl named Sarah. I got a job at the mill and I raised 3 kids. I became the man in the chair with the blanket, but the farmer stayed with me. He became a symbol of the part of me I had to keep hidden, the part that knew how to stay still, the part that knew how to wait, the part that understood that the most important things in life are the ones you can't see coming. I read a book once, years later, that went into the details of the Winter War. It confirmed everything I'd heard in that frozen foxhole in the Ardennes. Simo Häyhä. That was his name. He was a small man, barely 5 feet tall. He liked to hunt. He liked his dog. He didn't think of himself as a legend. He just thought of himself as a man who was good at a job. There was a quote from him. When someone asked him how he became such a good shot, he just said, "Practice." That haunted me more than the body count. Practice. The mundane, everyday repetition of a skill, used to achieve something so extraordinary and so terrible. It made me look at my own life. What had I practiced? I'd practiced being a soldier, I'd practiced being a father, I'd practiced being a survivor. We are all just the sum of the things we do over and over again until they become second nature. For Simo, it was the hunt. For me, it was the memory. I'm 92 now, and the house is quiet. Sarah passed away 10 years ago, and the kids have their own lives in cities I rarely visit. I spend a lot of time looking out the window at the woods behind my house. In the winter, when the leaves are gone and the snow covers the ground, it looks just like the stories. I find myself searching the shadows, looking for a white smudge that doesn't belong. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm just curious. I wonder if he's out there, the ghost of the farmer, watching over the old men who are finally ready to join him in the silence. I wonder if we'll have a chance to talk once I cross that line. I'd like to ask him if the mouthful of snow was really as cold as I imagined. I'd like to ask him if he ever found a way to stop being the White Death and just be Simo again. There's a comfort in the idea of the unseen. We spend our lives trying to be noticed, trying to make a mark, trying to be seen by the world. But maybe the real power is in the opposite. Maybe the real strength is in being the one who doesn't need to be seen to make a difference. The Finnish officers discovered a miracle of survival and skill, but what they really discovered was the power of a man who has nothing left to lose but his home. That's a lesson I've carried with me through every decade of my life. You don't need a uniform or a medal to be a force of nature. You just need a purpose and the discipline to see it through, no matter how cold the world gets. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm an old man now and my voice is getting thin, but the stories are as strong as they ever were. They are the only thing I have left to give. I remember the first time I saw a man die up close. It wasn't the sniper. It was a boy in my company, a kid named Thompson. He was cleaning his rifle and he made a mistake. A simple, stupid, human mistake. The sound was so loud in the small room we were sharing. It wasn't a tactical elimination. It wasn't a ghost in the snow. It was just a tragedy. I remember looking at his face and thinking how unfair it was. He didn't get to be a legend. He didn't get to protect anything. He just stopped. That's the reality for most of us. We aren't the White Death. We aren't the elite. We're just people trying our best in a situation that is designed to break us. The farmer was an outlier, a freak of nature and circumstance, but he gave us something to hold on to. He gave us a story that made the fear feel like it had a name. And sometimes, naming the fear is the only way you can keep walking forward. When the Finnish officers walked the battlefield and saw what one man had done, they weren't just seeing dead soldiers. They were seeing the evidence of an invisible will. They were seeing what happens when a human being becomes a sharp, focused point of resistance. I've seen that same will in the eyes of men I served with, and I've seen it in the eyes of my wife when she was fighting the cancer that eventually took her. It's the same fire. It's the refusal to be extinguished. Whether it's 542 enemies in the snow or one more day of life in a hospital bed, the struggle is the same. We are all fighting our own version of the winter war, and most of us are doing it unseen, in the quiet corners of our own lives. I think that's why I'm telling this now. I want people to understand that the heroes aren't always the ones on the posters. Sometimes they're the ones you never see. Sometimes they're the ones who do the hard, terrible work in the dark so that others can live in the light. I'm not a hero. I'm just a witness. I'm the guy who heard the story and lived long enough to tell it. And maybe, by telling it, I can help keep the silence at bay for just a little while longer. The woods are dark and full of shadows, but as long as we keep talking, as long as we keep remembering, we aren't alone. We're all part of the same long line of ghosts, waiting for the sun to come up over the Ardennes. The day I left the army, they gave me a piece of paper and a handshake and told me to have a nice life. I walked out of that gate and felt like I was floating. The weight of the rifle was gone, the weight of the pack was gone, but the weight of the woods was still there. I went to a diner and ordered a cup of coffee. The waitress smiled at me and asked if I was coming or going. I didn't know how to answer her. I felt like I was doing both at the same time. I was going back to a world that didn't understand me, and I was coming from a place I could never fully leave. I sat there for 3 hours, just watching the steam rise from my cup, thinking about the farmer. I realized then that I would always be a part of his story, and he would always be a part of mine. We were bound together by the cold and the silence, and the things we saw when no one else was looking. Years later, I took my son on a hunting trip. He was 12, full of energy and questions. We were sitting in a blind, waiting for a deer, and he was fidgeting. I told him, "You have to be still, son." You have to be part of the tree." He looked at me like I was crazy. He didn't understand. He hadn't heard the story. I started to tell him about the farmer in Finland, about the snow in the mouth and the iron sights. I saw his eyes go wide. He stopped fidgeting. He sat there, perfectly still, for 2 hours. We didn't get a deer that day, but something passed between us. He understood for the first time that there's a power in the quiet. He understood that being a man means knowing when to speak and when to listen to the woods. It was the best day we ever had together. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My son is a grown man now, with kids of his own. He calls me every Sunday and we talk about the weather and the family. But every now and then, he'll mention the snow. He'll say, "It's a white death kind of day, Dad." And I know he remembers. I know that the story didn't end with me. It's a small thing, but it's enough. It's the way we stay alive. We pass the legends down from father to son, from veteran to stranger, until the ghosts aren't so scary anymore. They're just part of the family. I'm tired now. The sun is starting to set, and the shadows are stretching across the floor. My daughter will be here soon to help me with dinner. She'll ask me how my day was, and I'll tell her it was fine. I won't tell her about the Ardennes or the Finnish farmer or the smell of cold pine. She doesn't need to know those things. She lives in the light, and that's where she should stay. But when she leaves and the house goes dark, I'll sit here in my chair and I'll listen. I'll listen for the breath in the dark. I'll listen for the bolt clicking home, and I'll know that I'm okay. Because I've told my story, I've given the ghosts their due, and now finally I can be still. The Finnish officers, they saw the numbers, but what they really found was the soul of a people who wouldn't be broken, a people who would use every scrap of land and every ounce of skill to defend what was theirs. That's what I want you to remember. It's not about the killing. It's about the refusing to die. It's about the farmer who stood his ground when the whole world was trying to push him off it. We all have a piece of that in us, somewhere deep down. We just have to be quiet enough to find it. So, when the winter comes and the snow starts to fall, don't just look at the cold. Look at the silence. Think about the man who turned that silence into a shield. And think about the boys who sat in the holes and listened to the stories so they wouldn't feel so alone. We're all just trying to get through the night, one memory at a time. I'm Henry Lawson, and I'm glad you stayed to listen. It's been a long journey, but the view from here isn't so bad. The woods are peaceful now. The farmer has gone home. And maybe, just maybe, I can go home too. I think back to the medals they gave us. They're in a drawer somewhere, gathering dust. They don't mean much to me. The things that matter aren't the things they can pin on your chest. They're the things you carry in your heart, the secrets you keep, and the stories you share when the time is right. The Finnish farmer didn't need a medal to know he'd done his job. He just needed to see his land free of the invaders. I didn't need a parade to know I'd done mine. I just needed to see my kids grow up in a world that wasn't at war. We got what we wanted in the end. It cost us a lot, more than anyone who wasn't there can ever understand, but we got it. And that's enough for any man. I can hear the car pulling into the driveway. That'll be my daughter. I'll put on my smile and I'll be the old man she expects me to be. I'll eat my soup and I'll talk about the grandkids. But in the back of my mind, I'll still be in the snow. I'll still be listening to the wind. And I'll be grateful for every second of it. Because even the dark parts of the story are part of the gift. They're what make the light feel so bright. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Good night and God bless. Watch the tree line and keep your heart warm. That's the only way to beat the winter. That replacement soldier who told us about the Finn, his name was Gantry. He was a skinny kid from somewhere in the Ozarks, and he had these eyes that looked like they'd seen the bottom of a very deep, very dark well. He told us that the Finnish officers who eventually went out to count the bodies in the wake of that farmer, Simo, didn't just find dead men. They found a landscape of psychological ruin. He said the officers described finding Russian units where the men were still sitting in their positions, frozen solid, because they were too afraid to move and draw the attention of the man they couldn't see. They found officers who had been shot through the head while they were in the middle of giving orders, their hands still frozen in a gesture of command. It wasn't just warfare, it was a surgical removal of hope. Gantry told us this while we were huddled under a tarp near Bastogne, the snow drifting in through the gaps. We didn't laugh. We didn't call it a tall tale. We just looked out at the white tree line of the Ardennes and wondered if the Germans had a farmer of their own. You have to understand, by the time we hit the winter of '44, we were exhausted. We'd been through the hedgerows, we'd seen the breakout, and we thought the war was almost over. Then the sky turned gray and the temperature plummeted, and suddenly we were back in the dark ages. We were fighting for feet of frozen ground, and the woods were our greatest enemy. Every time a branch snapped under the weight of the snow, every man in my squad reached for his rifle. We were jumpy, we were cold, and that story of the Finnish farmer, it acted like a poison in our minds. It made us realize how easy it is to be erased. One man, one rifle, and a whole world of patience. That's all it takes. I remember looking at my own rifle, an M1 Garand, a beautiful piece of machinery, and feeling like it was useless. It was loud and heavy, and it gave me away every time I fired it. I wanted what the farmer had. I wanted the ability to be nothing. I wanted to be the wind. There was this one night. The wind was howling so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. We were in a defensive perimeter, and I was on watch with a guy named Peterson. He was a quiet kid, used to work in a library back in Ohio. He was the last person you'd expect to find in a war, but he was steady. We were sitting there, back to back, trying to keep the blood moving in our legs. Peterson whispered to me, "Henry, do you think he's out there?" I didn't have to ask who he meant. I just said, "Maybe. But if he is, he's probably as cold as we are." Peterson shook his head. "No," he said. "Men like that don't feel the cold. They use it." I've thought about that a lot over the years. The idea that you can take the very thing that's trying to kill you, the ice, the silence, the isolation, and turn it into a tool. That's what that farmer did. He didn't fight the winter, he became it. And that's what the Finnish officers finally realized when they looked at those 542 men. They weren't looking at the work of a soldier. They were looking at the work of the winter itself, personified in one man. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It's strange, the things that stick with you. I don't remember the face of the first German I saw, but I remember the way the light glinted off a frozen puddle near his boot. I remember the sound of a Messerschmitt overhead, that low, throbbing growl that made your teeth ache. And I remember the stories. In the infantry, stories are more than just entertainment. They're a map. They tell you where the edges of the world are. The story of the White Death told us that the edge of the world was much closer than we thought. It was right there, at the end of a rifle barrel, held by a man who didn't care about our politics or our letters from home. He only cared about the boundary of his land. I remember a day in January, just after the sun had finally broken through the clouds. We were moving through a small clearing, and the snow was so bright it made your eyes water. We felt exposed, like bugs on a white sheet. Suddenly, there was a crack. Not the deep boom of an .88, but the sharp, whip-like snap of a bolt-action rifle. A guy about 20 yards ahead of me, a replacement whose name I hadn't even learned yet, just crumpled. He didn't scream. He just folded. We all hit the deck, burying our faces in the freezing slush. We waited and waited. We couldn't see anything. There was no smoke, no flash, no movement. Just the white world and the body of that kid bleeding out into the snow. I felt that same holy terror the Russians must have felt in the Finnish woods. It's the terror of the absolute unknown. You're being judged by someone who hasn't introduced themselves. Miller, our squad leader, started barking orders, trying to get us to spread out, but we were paralyzed. We knew that as soon as we moved, the ghost would choose another one of us. We stayed there for nearly 3 hours. My feet went numb, then they started to throb with a pain so intense I wanted to cry. But I didn't move. I thought about the farmer. I thought about the snow in the mouth. I tried to slow my breathing, tried to make myself as small as possible. I realized in those 3 hours that the farmer wasn't just a legend to be admired. He was a warning. He was what happens when a human being decides that the cost of survival is their own soul. Because you can't kill that many men, one by one, watching them through a sight, and remain the same person. You become something else. Something harder, something that doesn't fit in a kitchen or a church anymore. Eventually, we got some mortar fire on the tree line, and the sniper, whoever he was, must have pulled back. We gathered up the kid's body and moved on. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't. To talk about it was to admit how vulnerable we were. But that night, as I lay in a shallow hole, I realized that the Finnish officers who made that discovery were probably the only ones who truly understood the horror of the war. They didn't see the glory of the defense. They saw the efficiency of the slaughter. They saw 542 lives ended by one man's steady hand. It's a number that defies morality. It's just a fact, like the number of trees in a forest or the number of stars in the sky. It just is. And that's the hardest part of the war to live with. The fact that human life can be reduced to a tally mark on a piece of paper. As we pushed into Germany, the terrain got even more treacherous. We were in the mountains, and the fog was so thick you could taste it. It was wet and heavy, and it clung to your clothes like a shroud. We were hearing reports of werewolves, German partisans who were supposed to stay behind and fight a guerrilla war. We didn't know if they were real or just more rumors, but after the stories of the Finnish farmer, we were ready to believe anything. We started looking at every farmhouse, every barn, every woodpile with suspicion. We'd see an old woman hanging laundry and wonder if she was signaling someone in the hills. We'd see a kid playing with a wooden sword and wonder if he was a scout. The war had turned us into the very thing we were afraid of. Paranoid, cold-blooded hunters who saw threats everywhere. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember sitting in a captured German bunker one night, sharing a tin of cold beans with Miller. The walls were dripping with condensation, and the air smelled of stale tobacco and old sweat. Miller looked at me and said, "Henry, do you think people back home will ever understand this? Not the battles, but the way it feels to never be safe?" I didn't have an answer for him then. I'm not sure I have one now. How do you explain to someone who has never been hunted what it does to your mind? How do you explain the way the world changes when you realize that every shadow could be your end? You can't. You just live with it. You carry it like a stone in your pocket, and eventually you forget it's even there until something, a cold wind, a certain smell, reminds you of the weight. I think that's what those Finnish officers felt when they looked at the results of Simo's work. They were looking at a weight that an entire nation would have to carry. Yes, he saved them. Yes, he was a hero. But he was also a reminder of the price of their freedom. 542 men who would never go home because one farmer was too good at his job. It's a heavy thing to celebrate. I sometimes wonder if Simo ever wanted to be found, or if he would have been happier if the snow had just covered everything up, if the numbers had remained a secret between him and the forest. But the world doesn't work that way. The world wants its legends, it wants its heroes, it just doesn't want to see the blood on their hands. When the war finally ended, I was in a town called Magdeburg. The world was a mess of rubble and refugees, a sea of displaced humanity trying to find its way back to something resembling a life. I saw a group of Russian soldiers there, and I remembered Gantry's story. I looked at their faces, tough, weathered, exhausted, and I wondered if any of them had been in the woods in Finland. I wondered if they still jumped when they heard a twig snap. I wanted to go up to them and ask, but I didn't speak the language, and besides, what would I say? Did the ghost get you too? It seemed like a cruel thing to ask. We were all survivors of something, and the best thing we could do for each other was to let the silence remain. I came home in '46 on a ship that felt too big for the person I'd become. I stood on the deck and watched the European coastline disappear, and I felt a strange sense of loss. Not for the war, God knows I was glad that was over, but for the person I'd been before the woods. That boy was gone, buried somewhere in the Ardennes or left behind in a cellar in Germany. The man who was coming home was a stranger, even to himself. I got back to my town, and it was exactly the same as I'd left it. The same shops, the same people, the same sun hitting the same trees. But it wasn't the same to me. I'd seen the unseen. I'd heard the stories of the farmer, and I'd lived through my own version of them. I knew that the peace was just a thin layer of ice over a very deep, very cold lake. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. For the first few years, I couldn't go into the woods at all. Even the small patch of timber behind my father's house felt like a trap. I'd see the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, and I'd think of the glint of a scope. I'd hear a squirrel rustle in the brush, and my heart would hammer. My wife, Sarah, she was patient. She didn't ask questions. She just held my hand when I woke up screaming and told me I was home. It took a long time, but eventually, the woods became just woods again. I learned to hunt, though I never took it as seriously as some. I just liked the stillness. I liked the feeling of being the one who was watching, rather than the one being watched. It felt like a way to take back some of what the war had stolen. I often think about those 542 men. Who were they? They were sons, husbands, fathers. They had names and dreams and favorite songs. And they were all extinguished by a man who probably just wanted to be left alone to tend his sheep. It's the great irony of war. The people who are best at it are often the ones who want it the least. Simo Häyhä wasn't a professional soldier. He didn't have a chest full of medals when he started. He was a man who knew his land and knew his rifle. And that made him more dangerous than any general with a map. He was personal. He was precise. He was the embodiment of the home front fighting back. I think that's why the story resonated so much with us. We were all just kids who wanted to go home, and we were terrified of the man who was already there. In my later years, I started reading more about the Finnish officers and what they discovered. They found that the psychological impact of Simo's presence was so great that the Russians had to deploy entire divisions just to deal with him. Think about that. One man with a bolt-action rifle, tying down thousands of troops. That's the power of the individual. That's the power of the ghost. It's not about the number of people you kill, it's about the number of people you make afraid. And he made an entire army afraid. I think about that when I look at the world today. We have all these high-tech weapons, drones and satellites and missiles that can hit a postage stamp from across the world. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to the man in the mud. It still comes down to the one who can stay still the longest. I'm sitting here now, 92 years old, and I can feel the clock ticking. It's a different kind of silence than the one in the Ardennes, but it's just as heavy. It's the silence of a life coming to an end. I'm not afraid of it. I've lived through the worst that man and nature could throw at me. I've seen the white death in my mind's eye, and I've survived the ghosts of my own past. I think about the Finnish farmer, and I hope he found peace. I hope that in his final years, he didn't see the 542. I hope he just saw the snow and the trees and the faces of the people he'd saved. I hope he knew that he did what he had to do and that it was enough. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My daughter tells me I should write all this down, but I've never been much for writing. I like the sound of the voice. I like the way a story feels when it's told from person to person. It's more real that way. It's like a baton being passed in a race. I'm passing it to you now. I'm giving you these memories, these fears, and these reflections. Take them for what they're worth. Use them to understand that the world isn't always what it seems. There are forces at work that we can't see, and there are heroes who never get a parade. I remember a moment in April of '45. We were in a small village, and the fighting had mostly stopped. I found a small garden behind a ruined cottage. There were some tulips starting to come up through the debris. They were bright red, a startling contrast to the gray dust of the war. I stood there for a long time, just looking at them. I thought about how the earth doesn't care about our wars. It just keeps growing. It keeps turning. The snow melts, the flowers bloom, and the bodies of the 542 eventually become part of the soil. There's a comfort in that. The earth is the ultimate witness and the ultimate judge. It remembers the farmer and it remembers the soldiers, and it treats them all the same in the end. I'm going to close my eyes for a bit now. The sun is warm on my face and the house is quiet. I can hear the birds in the trees outside, and for once the sound doesn't make me reach for a rifle. It's just birds. It's just life. I think the farmer would have liked that. I think he would have understood that the ultimate goal of the hunt is to finally be able to put the gun down. I've put mine down. I've walked through the woods. I've heard the stories. And I've survived the silence. And now, at 92, I think I'm finally ready to let the snow cover it all up. I often wonder what those Finnish officers said to each other after they filed their reports. Did they sit in a mess hall and drink to the man who'd done the impossible? Or did they just stare at the floor, wondering what kind of world produces a man like that? I suspect it was a bit of both. We're all capable of extraordinary things when we're pushed to the edge. The question is what we do when we come back from that edge. Simo went back to his farm. I went back to my mill. We tried to be normal again. We tried to forget the count, but the count never forgets you. It stays with you, a silent tally in the back of your mind, reminding you of what you were once capable of. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I want to tell you about Miller one last time. He made it home too, but he wasn't the same. He moved to Montana, as far away from people as he could get. He sent me a Christmas card every year for 20 years, and then they stopped. I like to think he's out there somewhere, sitting on a porch, looking at the mountains, and finally feeling safe. I like to think that all of us who were hunted in those woods finally found a place where the shadows are just shadows. That's the real victory, not the treaties or the borders, but the peace of mind that comes when you realize the war is finally over. My daughter is calling me now. Dinner is ready. I'll go in and eat, and I'll listen to her talk about her day. I'll be the old man in the chair, the one with the stories he rarely tells. But I've told this one to you, and that makes me feel a little lighter. It makes the silence feel a little less like a threat and more like a friend. The Finnish farmer, the American soldier, the Russian ghosts. We're all part of the same story now. A story of survival, of skill, and of the incredible, terrible weight of being human in a world that can sometimes be very, very cold. I remember the way the snow felt against my cheek when I was lying in that ditch in Germany. It was so cold it burned. I remember thinking that if I died there, at least I'd be part of the land. I think that's what Simo felt every day. He wasn't just on the land, he was of it. And that's why they could never find him. You can't find something that doesn't want to be separate. I've spent my whole life trying to be separate, trying to be an individual, trying to make my mark. But as I get older, I realize that the real peace comes when you let yourself be part of something bigger, part of the history, part of the memory, and part of the earth. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The world will keep turning, and new stories will be told. There will be new hunters and new prey, new legends and new tragedies. But the story of the farmer in the snow will always be there. A reminder of what one person can do when they have a home to protect and a rifle in their hand. It's a dark story, yes, but it's also a story of incredible resilience. And in a world like ours, we need all the resilience we can get. Good night then, and thank you for listening to an old man's memories. It means more than you know. I look at my hands sometimes, and they're spotted and wrinkled, the skin like old parchment. They're the same hands that held that grease gun, the same hands that pulled Joe behind the trough, the same hands that gave chocolate to a shivering enemy. They've done a lot of work, these hands. They've built houses and held babies and planted gardens. But they still remember the weight of the war. They still feel the cold of the Ardennes. They're a living record of everything I've been through. I think Simo's hands were the same. No matter how many years passed, no matter how many sheep he sheared or fish he caught, those hands always knew the feel of the trigger. They always knew the 542. I'm glad I'm telling this now. I'm glad I'm not carrying it all to the grave. Stories are meant to be told, not buried. If we bury them, they just fester. But if we tell them, they become part of the air. They become part of the world's understanding of itself. The Finnish officers who discovered what that farmer had done, they were the first to bring that story into the light. And now I'm doing my part to keep it there. Not as a glorification of death, but as a testimony to the strength of the human spirit. Even in the coldest winter, even in the darkest woods, that spirit can find a way to endure. And that, more than anything, is what matters. So, walk softly when you're in the woods. Listen to the wind. Remember the people who came before you and the sacrifices they made so that you could walk there in peace. And if you ever feel like you're being watched, don't be afraid. It's just the memory of the ghosts reminding us that we're never truly alone. We're all part of the same long, snowy road, and we're all just trying to find our way home. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about the way we talk about war now. It's all about statistics and strategy, about political goals and territorial gains. We forget the personal nature of it. We forget that every shot fired is a choice made by a person. Simo made that choice 542 times. Each time, he had to decide that his home was worth more than the life in his sights. That's a heavy burden to place on a farmer. It's a heavy burden to place on anyone. But that's the reality of the world we've built. We force people to make impossible choices, and then we judge them for the results. I don't judge Simo. I don't judge the men who are trying to find him. I just feel a deep, abiding sadness for all of us. We are so capable of beauty, of creation, of love. And yet, we spend so much of our time and energy figuring out better ways to disappear into the snow and kill each other. It's a tragedy that has been repeating itself since the beginning of time. But within that tragedy, there are moments of incredible courage. There are stories like the White Death that remind us that even in our darkest moments, we are not helpless. We have the power to resist, we have the power to stay still, and we have the power to survive. The sun has finally slipped below the horizon. The sky is a deep, bruised purple, and the first few stars are starting to blink on. It's the time of day when the world feels most like a memory. I'm going to sit here for a few more minutes in the fading light and think about the Ardennes. I'll think about Gantry and Miller and Peterson. I'll think about Joe. And I'll think about the Finnish farmer waiting in the snow for a winter that never seemed to end. We're all still waiting, in a way. Waiting for the light to come back. Waiting for the silence to be just silence again. But until then, we have the stories. We have the shared memories of the cold and the dark. And we have the knowledge that we are still here. 92 years of life, and I'm still here to tell you about it. That feels like a victory in itself. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm an old man, and I'm ready for my dinner. But I'm glad we had this time together. It's good to talk. It's good to remember. And it's good to know that the ghosts are finally at rest. The Finnish officers, they saw the bodies, but they also saw the silence. They saw the space where a man had been and the impact he'd left on the world. I hope that when people look back at my life, they don't just see an old man in a chair. I hope they see the spaces I've occupied, the people I've loved, and the stories I've kept alive. I hope they see that I was here, that I stood my ground, and that I didn't let the winter win. That's all any of us can hope for, really. To be remembered not just for what we did, but for who we were when the world was trying to make us someone else. I can hear my daughter's footsteps now. She's coming to get me. The door will open, the light will spill into the room, and the ghosts will retreat back into the shadows where they belong. I'll smile, I'll stand up, and I'll walk into the warmth, but a part of me will always stay here, in the quiet, looking out at the tree line. A part of me will always be the soldier in the hole, listening to the legend of the farmer, because once you've heard a story like that, you never really stop listening, you just learn to live with the sound. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It's been a long night, but the morning will be here soon. And maybe, in the new light, we'll all see the world a little differently. Maybe we'll see that the unseen enemy was never really an enemy at all, but just another person, caught in the same cold wind, trying to find a way home. Good night. God bless you. And keep the fire burning. It's the only thing that keeps the winter at bay. I remember the last day of the war for me. It wasn't a big explosion or a grand surrender. It was just a realization. I was sitting on a stone wall, looking at a field of clover. The sun was warm, and the air was still. I realized that I didn't have to be a soldier anymore. I didn't have to be a hunter. I could just be Henry. I could just be a man who liked the sun and the clover. It was the most beautiful feeling in the world. I think Simo felt that too, when he finally went back to his farm. The relief of being allowed to be ordinary. It's the greatest gift a man can receive. I've had a lot of years to be ordinary. I've enjoyed them. I've cherished them. But I've never forgotten that the ordinary is a luxury. It's something that has to be defended, sometimes in ways that are terrible and hard to talk about. The Finnish officers who made that discovery in the snow, they knew that. They knew that the ordinary lives of the people in the villages depended on the extraordinary actions of the man in the woods. We are all beneficiaries of those actions, whether we know it or not. We all live in the light because someone was willing to stand in the dark. And so, I'm grateful. Grateful for the farmer, grateful for my brothers in arms, and grateful for you for listening to this old man's rambling. It helps, it really does. It makes the weight feel a little lighter, knowing that someone else knows the story. Knowing that the memory of the White Death and the memory of the boys who heard about him in the Ardennes isn't going to vanish into the snow just yet. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about the way the world has changed since '44. It's a faster place, a louder place, but the fundamentals haven't changed. People still love their homes, they still fear the unknown, and they still tell stories to make sense of the chaos. The story of the Finnish farmer is a fundamental story. It's a story about the power of the individual against the machine. It's a story about the land and the people who belong to it. And as long as we keep telling it, we keep that power alive. We remind ourselves that we are not just cogs in a wheel. We are human beings, capable of incredible things. I'm going to go now. My daughter is at the door. She's got that look on her face, the one that says, "Come on, Dad, enough staring at the dark." She's right, of course. There's a time for remembering and a time for living. And right now, it's time for living. But don't you worry, the stories are still here. They're tucked away in the corners of my mind, waiting for the next time someone wants to listen. They're the only thing that truly lasts. So, one last time, look at the snow, look at the trees, and remember the farmer, remember the soldier, remember the silence, and most of all, remember that even in the darkest winter, the sun will eventually come up. It always does. We just have to stay still and wait for it. Good night. I sometimes wonder if the Russian soldiers who survived those woods ever talked about it. Did they tell their children about the ghost in the white suit? Did they warn them about the dangers of the forest? I think they must have. A story like that doesn't just go away. It becomes part of the culture, part of the collective nightmare. It's a reminder that there are limits to power, and that even the greatest army can be humbled by a single man with a purpose. That's a lesson that every generation needs to learn over and over again. And I've learned it. God knows I've learned it. I've seen the proof of it in the eyes of my friends and in the faces of my enemies. I've seen it in the ruins of Europe and in the prosperity of America. It's the truth of the human condition. We are fragile, yes, but we are also unbreakable. Like the Finnish farmer, we can disappear into the landscape and wait for our time. And when that time comes, we can change the world. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm an old man, but I'm a lucky man. I've seen the worst and I've seen the best. And through it all, I've kept my voice. I've kept my story. And now I've given it to you. Do with it what you will. But whatever you do, don't forget it. Because as long as we remember, the ghosts are never really gone. They're just waiting for the next person to listen to the wind. My daughter is helping me up now. My knees are creaking and my back is stiff, but I'm still moving. I'm still here. I'm going to walk into the kitchen, sit down at the table, and be the man I was meant to be. But the soldier in the Ardennes, the one who heard the story of the White Death, he's walking right beside me, and he always will be. We're in this together until the very end. Good night. The Finnish officers, they found the truth in the snow. I found the truth in the silence. And you found the truth in the story. That's the way it works. We pass the truth from one to another, like a candle in the dark. Keep it burning. Don't let it go out. Because as long as there's light, the winter can't win. Good night, and God bless. I remember once during a ceasefire, I saw a German soldier across a small creek. He was washing his face in the cold water. We didn't fire. We just looked at each other. For a second, we weren't enemies. We weren't soldiers. We were just two men, cold and tired, trying to feel clean. That's the humanity that the war tries to kill. That's the humanity that Simo had to push aside to do what he did. It's a terrible price to pay. But in the end, it's the only thing that matters. That moment of connection, even across a line of fire. It's what makes us human. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I've spent 92 years thinking about that moment by the creek. I've spent 92 years thinking about the 542 men. I've realized that the world is a complex, beautiful, and terrifying place, and the only way to navigate it is with a steady hand and a kind heart, even when you're in the woods, especially when you're in the woods. The door is closing now. The room is dark, but I'm not alone. I have my memories, I have my stories, and I have the knowledge that I've shared them with you, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Good night. The Finnish officers, when they finished their count, they didn't just write down a number, they wrote down a testament to a man's will. I hope this script, this narration, is a testament to mine. Not because I'm anything special, but because I'm a witness. And a witness has a responsibility to the truth. I've told you the truth as I know it. I've told you the story as it was told to me. And now, I can finally be still. Good night, and thank you for everything. I can still feel the cold on my skin sometimes. It's not a physical thing anymore, just a memory, but it's there. A reminder of the time when the world was made of ice and fear. I don't mind it. It's part of who I am. It's the foundation of everything I've built since then. You can't appreciate the warmth unless you've truly felt the cold. and I've felt it. I've felt it as deeply as any man can. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm Henry Lawson, and I've seen the White Death. I've lived through the long winter, and I'm still here to tell you that the sun is coming. Just hold on. Just stay still. The morning is closer than you think. Good night. The woods are quiet tonight. The wind has died down, and the snow has stopped falling. It's the kind of night when you can hear your own heart beating. I like it. It's a peaceful sound. It's the sound of life continuing, despite everything. And that's the best sound of all. The Finnish officers, they found the bodies. I found the soul. And now, you have the story. It's a good trade. It's the only trade that matters. Take care of yourself. And remember the farmer. He's still out there, in the silence, watching over the woods. And he's doing just fine. Good night. I think back to the first time I held my son. He was so small, so fragile. I remember looking at him and thinking, I have to protect this. That's the same impulse that drove the farmer. The impulse to protect what is small and fragile from a world that is big and cold. It's the most basic human instinct, and it's the most powerful. It can turn a farmer into a ghost and a soldier into a man. It's the reason we fight and the reason we eventually stop. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My son is a good man. He's got his own kids now. He doesn't have to worry about snipers in the woods or 88s on the road. He just has to worry about the things that everyone worries about. And that's a beautiful thing. It's the thing we were fighting for. It's the reason Simo stayed in the snow, so that the next generation could live in the light. I'm glad I could be a part of that. I'm glad I could do my part, even if it was just sitting in a hole and listening to stories. Because the stories are what hold us together. They're the glue that connects the past to the future. And as long as we keep telling them, we're never really lost. We're just on our way home. The light in the kitchen is bright. I can see my daughter setting the table. It looks warm in there. It looks safe. I'm going to go in now. I'm going to leave the woods and the winter behind. But I'll take the farmer with me. I'll take the 542, and I'll take you, because we're all part of the same story now. A story that never really ends. Good night. The Finnish officers, they were amazed by the skill, but they were haunted by the cost. I think that's the final lesson of the war. You can be the best in the world at what you do, but if what you do is destroy, there's a price to pay. Simo paid it. I paid it. We all paid it. But maybe, by telling the story, we can make that price worth something. Maybe we can help the next person understand that there's a better way to live. A way that doesn't involve ghosts in the snow or silence in the woods. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm tired now, truly tired, but it's a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from finishing a long day's work. I've done my job. I've told my story. And now I can finally sleep. Good night and God bless. I remember a young lieutenant we had, a guy named Ross. He was fresh out of West Point, full of ideas and bravado. He wanted us to go out on a night patrol to flush out the enemy. We all looked at him like he had two heads. We'd heard the stories of the Finnish farmer. We knew that the night belonged to the man who stayed still, not the man who went looking for trouble. Miller had to take him aside and explain things. He told him, "Lieutenant, out here, the most dangerous thing you can do is be seen. If you want to survive, you learn to be invisible." Ross didn't like it, but he listened, and he made it through the war because of it. It's a lesson that school can't teach you. It's a lesson that only the woods can provide. I wonder if that farmer ever felt a sense of pride. They say he was very humble, that he didn't like to talk about his achievements. I think that's a sign of a truly great man. He didn't do it for the glory. He didn't do it for the medals. He did it because it was necessary. And when the necessity was over, he stopped. There's a dignity in that. A dignity that is rare in this world. I hope I can have a little bit of that dignity in my own life. I hope I can look back and say that I did what was necessary and that I did it with a quiet heart. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My hands are shaking a bit more than they used to, but that's okay. It's just the years catching up. They can't take away what I've seen. They can't take away what I know. And they certainly can't take away the stories. Those are mine forever, and now they're yours too. I can smell the stew my daughter is making. Beef and carrots. It's a good smell. A home smell. It's a long way from the cold beans and the wet wool of 44. I'm lucky. So many of the boys I knew never got to smell a home-cooked meal again. They stayed in the woods. They stayed in the snow. I carry them with me every time I sit down at the table. I carry their hunger and their fear and their lost futures. And I eat for them. I live for them. It's the least I can do. The Finnish officers discovered a miracle of survival, but they also discovered the tragedy of war. It's two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And that's what makes these stories so powerful. They remind us of the complexity of the human experience. They remind us that we are capable of both the highest heroism and the deepest suffering. And that in the end, we are all just people, trying to find our way through the woods. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm Henry Lawson. I'm 92 years old, and I'm still listening to the wind. It's got a lot to say if you're patient enough to hear it. Good night. The door is open now. My daughter is smiling at me. Ready for dinner, Dad? She asks. I smile back. Ready, I say. I stand up and for a second I'm not 92. I'm 19, standing on the deck of a ship, looking at a new world. I'm 20, shivering in a hole in the Ardennes. I'm 21, crossing the Rhine into the unknown. And then, I'm back. I'm an old man, walking into a warm kitchen. It's all there, all at once. And it's okay. It's more than okay. Good night. I think about the 542 men one last time. I hope their families found peace. I hope their names are still remembered somewhere. And I hope that if they could see the world today, they would feel that their sacrifice, as unwilling as it was, wasn't in vain. We have a world that is mostly at peace. We have a world where people can live their lives without fear of the unseen. And that's a miracle that was bought with the lives of millions and the skill of a single farmer in the snow. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It's a good story, a hard story, but a necessary one. Thank you for staying with me until the end. It's been an honor to share it with you. Good night, and take care of each other. That's the only way we make it through the winter. The Finnish officers, they did their job. They counted the cost. I've done mine. I've told the story. And now, the rest is up to you. What will you do with it? How will it change the way you see the world? I hope it makes you a little more patient. I hope it makes you a little more aware of the quiet. And I hope it makes you a little more grateful for the light. Good night. I can hear the music from the television in the other room. Some game show, with people laughing and cheering. It's a strange sound, after all the silence I've been thinking about. But it's a good sound. It's the sound of people being happy. And that's what the farmer was protecting. That's what the boys in the Ardennes were fighting for. The right to be loud and happy and ordinary. It's a beautiful thing. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm going to go join the ordinary world now. I'm going to eat my stew and watch the news and kiss my grandkids. But I won't forget the woods. I won't forget the snow, and I won't forget the farmer. He's always there, just at the edge of my vision, a reminder of the power of the unseen. Good night. The Finnish officers found 542 souls. I found a lifetime of meaning, and you found a window into a world that is gone, but not forgotten. It's been a privilege to be your guide. I hope the journey was worth it. I know it was for me. Good night. I remember a story Gantry told us about a Russian officer who was found with a letter to his wife in his pocket. He'd written about how beautiful the Finnish woods were and how he wished she could see them. He'd been shot before he could finish the letter. It's a small detail, but it's the one that stays with me. The appreciation of beauty in the middle of a slaughter. That's the human spirit. That's what the farmer couldn't kill, and that's what the war couldn't destroy. It's the part of us that stays, even after the shooting stops. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm going to stop now. I've said enough. The rest is just silence. And silence is where the best stories are kept anyway. Good night. The Finnish officers, they saw the result. I've given you the perspective. Now, go out and live your own story. Make it a good one. Make it one worth telling when you're 92 and sitting in a comfortable chair. And remember, when the winter comes, stay still, slow your breath, and don't forget the snow in your mouth.